Hey everyone, this is Trovarsi. I have Alex. I think I'm pointing the right screen. ALX-106. He's here to do the compression session. And Alex, you just take it from here.
Yeah, so what is up, everybody? Thanks for being here. And we're talking about compression today. Compression can be a sticky subject and can be kind of mysterious. And when you get into it, like there's ways to use it subtly. There's ways to use it as a complete like sound changer as an effect. I'm going to go through, I'm going to use Ableton for like a lot of this to show you because it can give you a visual representation. And what's nice about it is what I'll do is I'll have a one track that's an unaffected track, and then we'll put a compressor on it and we'll record that into another track so we can see the results. And so you'll be able to hear the results as we do them, but seeing them as a visual representation is really helpful, I think, because getting an idea of what a compressor does to your sound visually can help you understand like where it's going to fit and when you might want to use it, what instruments you want to use it on, things like that. So I'm going to be going in different, I'm going to be talking about this in a production focused thing right now. One of the things about compression in hardware and like for a live performance, right? So if you're doing a Eurorack performance, or you're doing a hardware performance, one of the things about having like you can't necessarily have a compressor on every track because you need to have so many compressors. In production, when you're in Ableton, something like that, you can have a compressor on the kick, on the snare. You can have another compressor on the drum bus. You can have one on all your synths. You have a lot more freedom with the DAW to get in there and have like multiple compressors on multiple channels. So I'm going to start there, and then we'll go into the Eurorack and show just how I have the muscle set up on the master bus. And it's a WMD module. It's a 4 HP little compressor, and it's really simple, but I can't just start there because the controls are so simplified that it takes a little bit of like getting used to of what you're doing with a knob that's called comp, as in compression. You have a knob for that that's doing multiple things. So we're going to show Ableton first. And yeah, as far as compression goes and what a compressor does, a compressor is like there's limiters, there's leveling amplifiers, and there's compressors. All different compressors will have like the reason why you would want to get a hardware piece versus a software piece or a software emulation is for the sound that the compressors are going to impart on your sound. So like the character of these compressors. I'm not going to talk about character very much. I'm going to talk about the actual thing that's happening. And because like when it comes to talking the difference between effect compressor and an optical compressor, all of that is basically like how it's going to react to the incoming sound. And then these circuits have characters of themselves, or characters in themselves, because you're literally just running your signal through a audio path, circuit, an electronic circuit, which can impart character on your sound. So if you think about compression like clipping, that's an easy way to think about it. We all talk, it's like a big thing with limiters. You start hearing Ableton crack, you've been clipped, crackle and stuff. You can throw a limiter on the master and you'll get rid of that crackle. And what that's doing is it's just literally hearing your signals coming in. It knows that it's crossing the threshold of 0 of unity, and then it's bringing it down. So what a compressor does is basically you have your input signal. I'm going to bring up Ableton now so we can see it, because that'll be easier for me to do it. All right, so it's kind of small down here, right? But this is the compressor in the lower corner. And you have these are your main parameters that you're going to mess with. So you have ratio, you have threshold, and then you have an output, and you have attack and release. So we're going to start with threshold. Threshold is the point at which the compressor is going to start working. And that means that the compressor is not going to do anything until your signal reaches a certain amplitude. And when you breach that amplitude, the compressor turns your signal down for a momentary time. So for however long you're crossing the threshold, it will continue to turn it down. But then when you leave the threshold, your signal goes back up. So you can use attack to say how fast this is going to happen. So how fast it's going to react once you cross that threshold. So a fast attack means that if you hit it with a quick flip, like a kick drum or a snare drum, something with a high transient, and a transient is just the beginning of the sound. So you can see here, like in this waveform right here, this is the transient. So your compressor, once you breach that threshold, it's going to turn it down. And so you can skip this part by turning you can skip the transient by turning up your attack and slowing it down. So that might be helpful for something you want to keep that high, that like impact on, but then you want to like fatten out the rest of it. And then release is just how long it's going to take to go back. So to go back to normal. There's a funny description of it that's like, you're a teenager, you're playing music in your mom's basement. The compressor is basically your mom yells at you because you played it too loud. So you turn it down, and attack is how long it takes for you to turn it down, right? And then your mom goes away, and the release is how long it's going to take for you to turn it back up. So I think that's a funny example of or a simile of how it works. And then we have the threshold. You can, with most compressors, especially in Ableton and things, as you bring the threshold down, it's going to turn the input gain up. So there are compressors that have input gain, but a lot of them are going to have that involved with the threshold. As you bring the threshold down, it's going to bring your input gain up. So it's going to help you get to that point. And the point of why it does that simultaneously and automatically for you is that with compression, the whole point is to lower your dynamics. So the range, your dynamic range, it's trying to squash that. So it takes anything that's a lower sound and it brings it up higher. And then you have a ceiling that it can't get above, right? So when you compress something like think about IDM music, where you have all these clicks and pitter patter and stuff like that, and you have that in the background, but you just want to bring it up a little bit. You want to bring that floor up a little bit. Compression works with that. You know, mastering is a crazy art. I am not a mastering engineer, but that is like one of the things that they do, that mastering engineers do really well, is bring up lower levels without like making it sound unnatural. And so I said earlier about like ambient music or just pads, things like that. We'll get into that of like why you can't, like why you would use it, why you might not want to, because with that kind of music, like you want a lot of dynamic range. And like classical music, for instance, you know, you want to have a very, very low violin part. And then when the whole orchestra comes in, you want that to be super impactful. So if you're compressing that, that means that these flutes are now going to, these like, you know, the quiet part is going to be louder. And so that loud part might not be as impactful. So there's some things to consider when you're doing compression. So I'm going to start out with this kick drum, and we'll just make a little loop here. And this is just a 909 kick. Y'all can hear that, right? Cool. So right now we have no compressor on it, or we have a compressor on it. So I'll turn it off. So this is the sound that we're getting normally. And as I turn the compressor on, you can see we'll turn threshold all the way up. You can see where my kick drum level is coming in. And as I start to turn down, we've got this gain reduction indicator that's telling us how much it's turning down, right? So I didn't get into ratio yet. Ratio is a cool tool, and it's basically the curve of the compressor, and it's how sharp it's going to be turning it down. And it's actually like a ratio of when you cross that threshold, how much is it going to turn down in correlation to how far you went above the threshold. So 1-to-1 would mean that you go above, and it's just, you go above the threshold 1 dB, it's going to go down 1 dB. So as you turn that up, you can see the curve gets flatter and flatter. And when we get up here to infinite, this is what we call a limiter. So a limiter over here and a compressor at full infinite are basically the exact same thing. And so this is where you dial in taste, right? So if we just smash this, you can hear right now we're getting that transient. So I'm going to show you what it looks like by recording real quick. I just have to move this window so I can see. There we go. So we will record this real quick and turn off my count in because you don't need to hear metronome every time. Cool. So this is a super compressed sound, and you can see that the compressor is slow enough that it's still letting this transient through. And because I turned the threshold way down, we turned up input gain a ton. So that's why the transient is much louder in the front end. But then this end here, see how much thicker it is all the way through to the back, whereas this one is more of a teardrop shape. This is like drum compression. A lot of people will talk about, I want to make my kick drum sound fatter. So one of the ways to do that is to limit it or to compress it. This is an extreme example, but I'm going to do it again, and you can see the attack. I'm just going to turn attack to the fastest it'll go. We'll record it again. And now you can see we've got these little slugs here. And it reacted so fast that we now destroyed the transient, and we just made this thing a fat line. If we make it smaller, you can see like we have this teardrop. We don't have that anymore. So that's one of the things of like, this is once again, very extreme, but this is one of the things where you can dial in your kick drum and just make it sound, or any drum, if you just want a little bit more fatness out of it. So one of the tricks that I love with this, so we'll do a little bit more subtle example real quick. We'll see how we go here. I'm going to bring this back to just this view. You can see as I turn ratio up, the gain reduction comes down further. Similarly to how it will when I turn the threshold down. But this is going to be a taste thing. So what I like to do for this is like, find a nice spot in threshold. One of the biggest things, I'm going to say this a lot, we already said earlier when we were talking before the recording started, is compression is all about your ears. I'm showing you in a visual representation so you can see like what the waveforms look like before and after, but it's all about your sound, the song, what the song needs, what the patch needs, whatever that is. And so this is all about dialing it into your taste. So personally, I like to have fast compressors because the click on the front, or like, especially for this kind of stuff, the click on the front, I like to flatten that out a little bit because I think that it's a little bit distracting sometimes. So let's listen to it now and record. Yeah. Cool. So with this one, we have a super fast attack. So we are smashing the transient a little bit, but now you can see I've got this fat side here, but we've still got a little bit more decay. So this is going to sound more natural, and it does sound more natural. So we'll listen to it by itself. This is dry. And then here's with the compressor. Super subtle, but just a little bit thicker, a little bit fatter. With house music, dance music, this is like a really big part of it. You can make your kick drums sound longer by having by compressing them, because you're basically taking the low volume information and turning that up without necessarily turning up the rest of the sample. So for a big long 808, if you compress it, you can make it sound more like a boom instead of a boom, you know, that kind of thing. So just really like whatever you need for the sound. We're going to talk about that forever. But so one of the tricks I wanted to show was how to use a limiter in this same way. So a limiter is basically a compressor with super fast attack. You don't even get attack as an option. And then just release. I usually leave this one, Ableton's on auto, but you can turn that off and you can mess with the release if you want. One of the interesting things about talking about this on kick drums and talking about making a fatter kick, you know, the 909 is an amazing sample. Like, it's an amazing drum machine. It's been used in countless amounts of records, and I still use it all the time. People still use it all the time. But when you hear it on records, most likely there's a little bit of compression on that kick. It's like what they talk about with the 808. 808 sounds really good. It sounds better when it's put through a compressor, or through when you're like clipping a preamp a little bit and getting some grunge on it, you know? So with this limiter, what I like to do with kick drums, it's just faster, I think. So just let it play. We'll turn the compressor off. The ceiling of the limiter is the compressor, is the threshold. It's basically the same thing as the threshold. So once you cross that ceiling, it's going to start turning down. So so what I like to do with this is start your sample, start whatever instrument you're on, pull the ceiling down to wherever it barely kisses it, right? So you can see this gain reduction here. We're just getting a tiny bit of gain reduction. And now we turn up the gain and we're pushing this signal into the ceiling, right? So let's do it all the way, right? It didn't get any louder, but it got fatter. You can hear the tails. So now check out what this looks like when we record it. So like,
Brick.
you might want to do that as an effect, right? Like, that's a cool effect. But it's obviously super extreme, but that's something that you could do. What I like to do to fatten up my kick drums, though, is just, like I said, bring that threshold down, or the ceiling down, to right where it's kissing it, and then start it. I think it sounds really good around -6. That's like the special spot for me. We record that. Boom. So with the limiter, we don't have the attack. I'll go back to the compressor in 1 second to show that. But see how fat this one is? And that the limiter is so fast, so that transient's just gone. But now we've got this fatness right here, and then a nice natural decay. So it still sounds nice and natural. And this is like a nice trick. If you just want your, especially for kick drums, we're talking about kick drums right now, but especially for kicks, if you just need it to be a little bit more thumpy, you know, don't go looking for a new sample. What you could turn up the decay on your kick drum. However, what that's going to do is just going to make your teardrop longer. It's not going to make this section louder. And so that's why compression is a big thing on drums and kick drums. And I just love these waveforms. It's the 909 is so rad because it has a pitch envelope. So you can see it's like higher frequency up here, lower frequency as the amplitude decays, and that's just like the magic of that sound. So any questions so far? Have I missed anything so far? Cool. So really nice tricks for just making your kick drum a little bit fatter. We can go into, this is a snare over here. This is just the same thing. I think it's a 909. It's just a 909 snare. Right? So classic sound from, you know, so many 90s records, but then you get into like early 2000s, like vaporwave stuff. And it's like, you take this snare and you just smash it. And we'll record that real quick. And when I say smash, the reason I keep saying that word is because what you're doing is you're taking the more low amplitude content and you're pushing it up against that ceiling. So you're literally just smashing it. And so you can see with this one, still sounds pretty natural, but all this noise right here, this is like, sounds like distortion, but this is just the noise circuit. The snappy is what they call it in 909. And you bring that out so much with compression, right? So I've turned it up a little bit more just to make it super gross. We have ratio all the way up. We're basically limiting at that point, or we are limiting at that point. I'm going to turn it back down a little bit, record it one more time. There you go. That's a pretty nice looking waveform. All that noise comes out. That's like a really nice and desirable thing. And like people transformed the way that the 909 sound with compression and EQ, but like especially compression, just by saying like bringing out all this noise makes it sound distorted, but there's no distortion on here. And the compressor's not adding any distortion. It's all just a part of the sound. You're just bringing that out. So now let's take the attack and we'll slow the attack down. There you go. So now we've got all this information coming out and we've got that transient peeking through, but looks like we're clipping. So this is when you would adjust the output gain. And we'll just keep that going, bring it down a little bit to find something nice. It's not so clippy. Maybe turn that up a little bit. What's that look like when we do that? So yeah, pretty interesting. Again, it's all about your ears. I tend to start with a faster attack. Ableton's default is at 2 milliseconds, which is super fast, but you'll see if we play it here. And I'm compressing a ton. Go back into kind of limiter settings here. You're still letting, that's still enough to let that transient through. And that might sound like a click a little bit. So that's where it's like, just use your ears. So I like to start fast. There's reasons you would do slow, but especially for drums, definitely start fast and whatever your sound needs yet again. So then the next example is a pad. I'll get there in a second. There we are. I made a few of these. I'm going to delete this one for now. We'll make our loop longer. And we'll just solo the pad again. Make sure the compressor is off. So this is our ambient stuff. Just a nice, simple pad. This is literally just a preset from Ableton.
Sorry, can you just make it? Can you make it maybe a bit louder?
Yeah, for sure. It was super quiet, or it was super loud when we started, so I didn't want to blow anybody out. Is that better? Cool, thank you. So why I wanted to show this one is when this starts out, it's super quiet, right? And actually right here, this is like from the loop. So if I just fade it in maybe. Just start, so that way we start from nothing, right? You bring it in. Okay, so let's compress this. We're just gonna watch it for a little bit. I'm gonna go like 4:1. We look down here at the threshold. We're not making it. We're making it now. And that's it. So one of the nice things about compression is the subtleties of it. And in ambient music, like I was talking to a friend about this last night, and he brought up a really good point that I didn't really consider, is you might want to have a subtle compressor, or even a subtle limiter on this style of patch, or this style of sound, just to, if something comes out and is super loud, just so that's not startling. But what I wanted to show on pads is like you can get aggressive and you can change the whole character. So I'll record this one as we go. I'm going to over compress it. So I'm gonna bring the threshold down to like where, like almost where it starts, like as far as amplitude. So check out how much gain reduction we have. Yet again, extreme example. That's why I wanted to show that right there. I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna make the looper longer. I do have reverb and delay on this patch, I think. Oh, no, I don't. I don't have anything. So this is what I want to show. Here's the end of that. Look how much we got out of that. At the end here, like this goes away and we're just like romping. Like this is just so loud because when we turn that threshold down, we're turning the input gain up. So we're pushing all of the lower amplitude content up. And so this might, like when you're doing this, this might be a thing that you could do to fatten up your sound, or like if you need to hear that. But like this is again super extreme, but you can just completely ruin the dynamics of this beautiful pad by over compressing it. So that sounds dope. But now we have so little dynamics in the beginning and end of the sample. And then all this content up here is also like just getting squashed. And like, look at the amplitude from here compared to here, and like here compared to here. We don't get any louder, but over here, it's just holding on. So it's kind of an interesting, thing. Like, and again, all to taste, all to your ears. But this example is just to show, like, for this kind of pad, I would definitely use compression as more of like a limiter. And like what I mean by that is at the have a higher threshold. So that way, when we get here, you still get these nice low end dynamics. And then, yeah, maybe like just at the top, start to bring it down. So if there's any weirdness, something gets loud, it helps you turn it down. It helps it not be super distracting. But now you still have all of this dynamic range, which is like such a big deal in ambient music and electronica and, you know, anything you want that in, you know, anything that's not just like banging techno. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, the question I have is, how do you manipulate the release time of the compressor sounds like this? Because I've got a tack down, but I seem to have a weakness with release times. And when I have too fast of a release, I guess it really modulates and pumps because it's following the contours of the sounds. Is that a case where you would use a slower release then, not to get a pumping sound based on the modulation? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like So yeah, we can do an extreme example to show it visually, because I'm just such a visual person, it helps me. But if we bring this way down and we just do like fast release, fast attack, let's see what this looks like when we record it. Maybe we can watch gain reduction, see how much it's moving. Oh, and that sounds nasty too, right? So probably just clipping a little bit, but we turn up the release and we'll leave attack super fast, but we'll turn release to like 2 seconds. We'll do the same thing. Now watch gain reduction once we get there. Still kind of moving. You can see it's attacking. So it's going down super fast, but it's not coming back super fast. It's not reacting. And this is going to be a lot more smooth and like natural sounding for this kind of patch. I use like and we'll get into program material here in a second. I use a slower release when it comes to like a full drum bus, or a full song, you know, like you would definitely use a little bit of a slower release for like mastering. I like, again, not a mastering engineer. I'll go into like my little self master, fake master and how I do it. But like that's definitely that is like the release, you can turn that up and like milk it, you know? And one of the things that really helped me with compression, why I'm doing so many of these extreme examples is when I was learning how a compressor worked, the first person that actually got through to me was like, what you need to do is like, he's like, don't be afraid of it. Pull that threshold down, turn the ratio up, like make it sound like garbage, then back it off. And that was like such good advice to me, because I was always trying to do this subtle thing. Everyone told me, you know, your compressor on the drum bus should be just like only reducing by like 3 dB or something. And like, yeah, sure, that's a good rule of thumb, if that's what sounds good. But like, if you start out by smashing it and really hearing what it sounds like, you'll get more of a feel for it. And so, yeah, same thing with release. Like, I'd say like for if you're having a pumping thing, definitely it's going to help smooth it out by having a slower release. And if we do the slower attack and just one more time and watch gain reduction, it's all in just watching how it's reacting. We can turn this way up, and now it's super smooth, and it's basically just hanging out there, and it's not dancing at all. And so for this kind of sound with like all this like weird kind of tickly stuff in there, you might want to have both, you know, a little bit slower attack and release, because you can let those things come through. You're gonna, and especially with a pad, right? Like we're crossing the threshold like here or something when in the time that we're going through this. So we're already there, and that's so that gain comes down. And once it's down at that spot, it's going, you know, those little tickly bits are already being turned down. So you don't necessarily need to like, you know, attack them. Like they don't need to be policed so hard, because the compressor is already coming down. All right, is that enough on, oh, I have one more example on this one. Is that enough on the pad though? Cool. So one of the things that I love to do with this kind of sound is, I was talking about it earlier, reverb and delay. So I'm going to put delay and reverb on here. And we're going to compress after them. And we'll make it sound kind of cool, hopefully. Turn feedback up quite a bit. Dry wet can be there. We'll do a ton of reverb and do our dry wet there. So, and then we're going to compress it quite a bit. I'm going to turn the ratio back down, but we'll have the threshold pretty low. And so why I wanted to show this example is we just did the compressed version, but we got all of this beautiful reverb and delay tails that we were able to like bring up with the compressor. However, we also are losing our front end dynamics, right? So I'll just do it with it off really fast. Start it like here. And just look at the tail. Sounds really nice and natural, but maybe the effect you want is to hear those tails more. So the obvious choice is compression, right? But like I was saying, if you do this and you really want that stuff to come out, then you're gonna lose your dynamics in the front end. So what I like to do for that is throw my delay and reverb on ascend and then compress the return. So we'll go over here, we'll turn this all the way up, and this will be more of an audio, like just listening example, because I'm not going to record the return so we can see it, but we go through here. Here's our compressor on the return. I'm going to mess with this while we go. So there we go. Maybe bring it down to like there. Do a slower release. The pad's gone, but we've got all those tails now. And those tails are being brought out by the compressor because we're turning up just the reverb and the delay. So one of the things is like with this style of music is like you can keep the dynamic range of your synthesizer content or whatever, you know, you can, of your program material, you can keep that intact and then really hear the compression of just the delay and the reverb. So that's pretty fun. I think that that's like a fun way to do it, and just like a nice little way to like turn your effects into a voice of their own and like really bring them out. Of course, you can just turn feedback up more. You can turn delay time up more. But what that's doing is it's just increasing the length of the teardrop. It's not letting the teardrop be more of a square. So again, all about the sound, all about what you're after. So one thing I haven't talked about yet is Sidechain. And I'm going to just go through it really quick. Sidechain is super popular. A lot of people are using it for this thing right here. We're going to use it on this pad. We'll bring the pad up to the kick. And a lot of people use it to just duck the volume of a synth or a bass or whatever to the kick drum. And so in Ableton's, you literally just go over here, hit Sidechain, and then find your kick drum. So it's called regular. And we can now, oh no, sorry. We'll listen to that, and we gotta listen to this. Your threshold is now reacting to a different channel. So we mapped it, the sidechain, to listen to the kick drum, and then we can bring in the threshold. And if we slow down or speed up the attack and speed up release, you've got this classic like early 2000s pumping sound, right? Super popular thing to do. And I talk about it in the video that I did on Muscle, that if you have a kick drum, the kick drum's the loudest thing in the mix. You might not need to do sidechain compression. I always talk about sidechain compression. I think it's an effect. For me, it's more of an effect. Like it is all about like this sound. You can get this sound by automating the volume, but who wants to do that? You know, like this is just like so fast. And you could automate your release times to mess around with that. You know, you can go around with that, but this is just a beautiful effect to make things sound really good. There's a classic thing of like ducking the bass to the kick so that way they don't fight for room, right? That's a very common thing, totally viable, totally usable. You can also fix that with, you know, you can also make your kick drum more present by turning the bass down or sequencing around the kick. You know, there's other ways to do it than just doing sidechain, and sometimes sidechain sounds unnatural. So to me, I think it's a beautiful effect. It can be a mixing tool. There's some really rad EQs, like multi-band compressors, that let you just compress a band of frequencies. And those are really cool for sidechaining bass to kick, because now you can just, you don't take out the you're not ducking the whole thing like we're ducking now. You're just ducking the frequencies that fight each other. Fab Filter, Multiband Pro or something can do that. Super cool. I don't have any of those plugins. I don't do that, so sorry I can't show you that. But you know, this is like, just for me, sidechain is a beautiful effect. It's really, really useful for that when it comes into you know, like mixing. I would recommend messing around with other means of mixing first. Okay, so my last example, I have two more examples. I'm just trying to get here quick because we've been going for a while. Yeah, Ian, any question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to sidechaining. A cool effect is to sidechain reverb on a send. Yeah. To the dry signal.
Yeah, totally. So that's one thing I should have shown when we were doing that pad example, right? Is sidechain put a sidechain after this, or after this compressor. So this one's bringing it all out, making it super thick, making you be able to hear that. But then you add another compressor with a sidechain to that dry signal. And what that's going to do is turn your send down while the dry signal's happen, or your return down while the dry signal's happening. When the dry signal goes away, you bring up everything else. So you bring all that reverb and delay back in. Thank you. That is an awesome suggestion, and yeah, really good example of a cool effect to use sidechain with. And so yeah, next one, we've just got a breakbeat. So here's no compression. I'm gonna turn this down just a little bit. So this is the dry breakbeat, and here's where you can use compression as an effect. So I love it on drums. And it's a cool thing with like these style, like real drums, right? Because as soon as I turn it on, you don't just hear the drums anymore, you hear the room more. You start hearing the natural reverb in the room. You start hearing all these other things that weren't there because you're turning them up. So listen to it again. And again, people call that fatness. That can be translated into fatness. So now compression has an effect. Just smash this thing. So bring the release out, just flattens the whole thing, and it basically just sounds like we turned it down, right? Bring it back up. Now that gain reduction is literally like following the like rumble of the kick drum. And it's just giving you this super cool, like, you know, effect. You may want that, you may not, but you can just bring out, we'll bring that low end back in on it. So no compression really, subtle, bringing out the room. And now we're like, all the noise in the recording, every little bit in that room is coming out. Just EQing that kick drum out a little bit because that's how it would fit better with the mix. And then these two together. sound really dope. So that's fun. But yeah, when it comes to like breakbeats and stuff, you can do the subtle compression thing. You can also, when you're smashing it, you can use that as an effect. And like that'd be like, to me, that'd be a super cool intro to a song. I don't know if I would have it smash the whole time, but I might use it in the beginning of a track for that. So then the last example in Ableton is just program material. And Trovarsi, am I going way too long? Are we doing okay?
I think we're okay. Everyone
Okay.
doing all right? No, this is great. One thing
Cool.
I wanted to add about the sidechain, which I like to do even in modular, is use like an LFO or like gates, like to modulate. So instead of it just being sidechained to the kick, it's like side
Yeah,
patterns. You can get and the pad is like but it's like
totally.
So kind
Well,
of
and in modular, sidechain's super cool too, because with the gates, you are no longer relying on the length of the sample or the thing. I keep calling it a sample, but the instrument. So just go back to kick drums. If you're using an 808, right, that's a pretty long thing. You have a compressor 808, it's going to be longer. You're sidechaining something to that kick. The compressor is going to react to how long that kick drum is and how long it's over the threshold.
right.
And so like when you use a gate or just a trigger, then you have a little bit more control over like attack and release, especially gate, because now you can say how long that gate length you want to be, instead of it having to rely on like the length of the kick drum, because the longer the kick drum, the longer the thing's going to duck for. And that's great, you know, but sometimes, especially like with 808s, it's a big thing. Like you don't, like even with a fast release, you don't get as much pumping as you want. So using a trigger or a gate instead of an audio signal would be good for that.
Totally. Yep.
CK, you got something?
Yeah, I'm just curious. This is all great, like, and has highlighted a lot of this use in Ableton that I've not bothered to learn because I'm normally live doing stuff on my modular. So, so my question is like, how does this translate to, like, because we can't have unlimited compressors in modular. So I'm always like, I have a few compressor modules, and I'm always kind of debating: do I compress my drums, or do I do a glue compress across the mix, or what's, you know, what do you recommend there for, and what do you do for live performances for compression across your?
So yeah, totally. So if I had a huge setup and wanted to carry a huge setup to gigs, I would have multiple mixers, maybe not performance mixers, but I'd have multiple mixers, and I would have a sub mix for my drums and maybe a sub mix for high-end content or something, but I'd sub mix more. And then you could use 2 or 3 compressors, like you said, just compress the drums, and then just compress another, like a voice or 2, whatever you need. You know, you could do that if you had the room. I personally use 1 compressor and I use it on the master, and that's it. And basically I'm going to show what I do with it in Ableton, and then I'm going to pull up the same patch and show you doing it in Muscle. And then that'll pretty much be it. But yeah, I would say, like, when it comes to it, if you can submix stuff, then that's a really nice thing to do. For like kick drum fatness, right? Like you want to compress a kick, a little plug, but the reason we designed Crater the way we designed it is that it has a sustain input, so you can hit it with a gate instead of just triggers, or not sustain input, sorry, sustain control, like a sustain level, which now you can hit it with a long gate and it'll stay open as long as the gate's there. And then when you take the gate away, you've got release after that. So you can kind of fake a compressed kick sound by just having a longer gate instead of using a trigger. And then your sustain amount is basically like the threshold level, like it's like what it's turning it down to. So you have a transient, then you have sustain. So you can fatten things up, and there's tricks like that, you know, in different modules, to just like, especially like I got that idea from samplers, right? So I was using kick drums and samplers and realized that if I put it in gate mode, that I could have more control over the fatness of my kick than if I just hit it with a trigger and did one shots. So, you know, I would say like in hardware and things like that, for me, especially live performance, compressor on the master is a big part of my sound. I always do it. It just like, to me, glues things together a little bit more. We talked about smashing. Gluing is a whole nother funny, you know, like term that is just completely arbitrary, but that term is just making what it means is it's taking all of your instruments in the mix and just trying to help them sound more cohesive. So you do that by mixing first and foremost, and then you help it with a compressor. And for live, I use a compressor on the master, and I feel like I can be a little bit sloppier with my mix because I've got that compressor on there. It just kind of helps me stay in check. But I don't think, like, if you need a sidechain compressor for an effect or something, that's awesome. You can also do that with envelopes and BCAs and get the same kind of effect when it comes to doing it in modular. So, you know, it's like, it's all about like what you're going for in that sound, like for the patch, for the song, yet again, and then how much room you have and what you're willing to what you're willing to do. I at one point had 2 or 3 muscles in my system and was compressing like my snare drum, you know, and it was like a module that I never touched because I set it sounds okay. And then it's just done. But like, I use samples for snares, so I can get rid of that by just making a better sample, you know. So there's, you know, it's a give and take in modular, especially in any live environment. It's a give and take of like what you're willing to bring out. Some people that do live PAs bring those like RNC, the really nice compressors. They're like $200. And put those on the end. I'm a big fan of that. I think that sounds great. Okay, so last thing here, we'll just go into the like meat of this track here. So this track, you can see this is the rough mix. This is like no compression on the master, and it's definitely a little bit the sounds in here are compressed already. That's kind of why we've got this square look to it already. But now we can add compression to the master. I'm gonna do like 4, bring it down just a little bit. So here's it without it, and here's it with it on. So listen to it now with it off. There's a bunch of pitter patter in the back, just like kind of shit. Not only does the sound perceived loudness get louder, but listen to all that stuff just come out. So there we go. We have a little bit of compression. I'm barely doing any gain reduction, and I've turned up the input volume obviously because I've taken the threshold down. So now I'm going to throw the limiter on. I'm hitting right at 0. So maybe I'll push this up here. And now this part, I'm still working on this personally, figuring out. I want this to be more dynamic, so I'm going to have to figure that out in the mix, because you can see in the rough mix, I don't have, this doesn't go down in volume as much as I had hoped it would. But when we bring this kick drum back in. Right now you can see we're gain reducing about to 6. I'd say on a master that's as far as you want to go, to -6. Turn the compressor off. Turn the gain of the limiter just up. So different sounds for different things, right? So the compressor at ratio 4, it's a little bit more mellow. Sounds really nice on this this sound, which I want to keep. Like I said, I want to keep dynamics alive, even though I don't have a ton of them already. I wish I had more. I'm working on it, but you know, it's like I would say for me, I would probably, if I were just going to master this track today and put it out, I would probably go to the loudest part, like over here, and dial in the compressor to where I think it sounds good. Brings out the stereo-ness of those pitter-patter things, but doesn't do too much. Maybe turn the release up a little bit so it's a little bit less pumpy. And then I just turn the limiter on, literally leave the ceiling at -30. Or, yeah, you know what I mean, -0.30. Maybe turn the gain up a tiny bit. But like, that's probably where I'd stay. Like if I had to submit this and say, I'm releasing this tomorrow, I'd probably get pretty close to that. As far as compression goes on the master. And yeah, I don't know if I'd really go much further with EQ or anything else, to be honest. It's just like, it sounds good, so probably go there. And if I can afford it, I'd send it to a mastering engineer who would actually do a better job, you know. But it's like for the master stuff, it's like, it's really cool to hear the difference between limiting and just, you know, like a 4-to-1 ratio or even like a 2-to-1 ratio. And that's one thing that's really easy for me to get in the weeds, like just because of how that knob works. I'm like always like up in the 4 range, which is actually pretty high. Like if you think about it, you go 1 dB over your threshold, you're turning it down 4 dB. Like that's a pretty big pump. So coming down to here, we might get a little bit more subtle. Which might be the way to go too. So it's all about, again, the sound, experimenting. And then, you know, like I said, I get locked into habits. And so my habit is just to like push this up here. And it's like, yeah, no, listen to it down here. See what that sounds like, especially on master stuff. All right. Any questions?
I think Omri, you have a question?
Yeah, I have two things actually. Maybe we'll speak about it later, but what about playing with the dry wet control? So I guess it's also compression.
Thank you.
And also, what about maybe you're also doing this like mid-side compression, like compressing just the mid or just the sides?
Yeah. So I again, like, so going into mid-side stuff, like I don't do it. It is awesome. I don't have any experience with it, so I can't really talk too much about it. To me, that is definitely like a mastering engineer thing.
Right. Because also there's also this Eurorack module from Wrong Electronics, I guess. The mid-side, whatever. Yeah,
mid-side plus,
yeah.
Yeah, totally. And that's, again, like I would say that's like, I love mid-side sound. I've worked with some mid-side EQs and stuff that are really cool. And I haven't really done mid-side compression, to be honest. It's just I'd say that's something to experiment with and see what you can get, you know, out of it.
If you would, but would you go first? So like compressing the mid, like where the most of the drums are, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
Or
so,
mostly the sides, like bringing the reverbs and everything out, or how?
Oh man, I think again, it's all about the sound, but it's such a good question, such a good example. Like you would have different settings for both, but you would compress both. So it's like you might go a little bit depends on what's in it. It really depends on what the
depends.
content is, right?
Yeah, for
But if
sure.
you have pitter patter flying around, you have high frequency drums flying around in the stereo field, then you might want to bring those out, but have a like a softer ratio on those, so you're not like pushing that input level up like so hard. You know, it's like you might want to have like a softer, just a softer compression on that one, but still like a pretty low threshold, right? And then in the middle, you'd probably want to do more of like a mastering like glue compressor. So just like just the top, you know, just the subtle gain reduction.
Yeah, cool. And also about the dry wet control and parallel compression.
Totally. So that's a huge thing again in mastering. And I use it. So like I was talking about earlier, I don't know if it was before we started recording, I use a electron analog heat a lot. And I use it like a compressor where I have the envelope move, like sending a negative envelope to either the distortion amount or sometimes the wet level. So it acts like a compressor and it's turning things down. And with that sound, I will do like heavier saturation, heavier distortion, and then back the dry wet off. We can show the sound with a compressor here. We'll go back maybe in this zone. All right, so we'll compress it, and then let's compress it to where it's like an effect. Like we're gonna just kind of go hard. Fast release, so we're getting some pumping going on. Cool. Let's go just to this drum part. Okay. We'll over compress it a little bit. All right, now we'll go over and we'll listen to the dry. And we'll bring in the wet. So this is like true parallel right here, 50%. And like now you basically have both signals playing. That dry is pretty quiet and the wet's pretty loud. That's pretty good. So right in the middle, you're getting that mix of both. And so when it comes to doing like parallel compression and this style thing, like this is like very common in mastering, again, very common in mixing. And what one of my friends is a mastering engineer, and his advice, like the way he says it is like, you know, you're basically blending, so you can have kind of an over compressed sound and introduce it a little bit without like just completely hearing, like it's not just like you're not hearing it over the whole mix, you know? So like here's the dry, here's the wet again. We go back it off a little bit. Sounds a little bit more natural, but with it off, like still that's pretty flat. We turn it up. That brought out a lot of stuff. And you're like, you know, we've got a pretty solid bit of compression and gain reduction going on. But when you do that dry wet, you know, you introduce that dry, and now you've got like those two things. You've got a little bit more of a natural sound. So again, huge thing for mastering engineers. And mastering is so crazy because people, you know, like those compressors, like some of them are, you know, people will just leave the ratio super low, barely compress it, and then do it 50%. So parallel. So you've just got like, let's see what that sounds like if we just do 2 to 1 here. So here's our wet, here's our dry, here's both. Just a nice, like subtle bringing out of stuff. And they would do that and then run it through, another compressor and then through an EQ. Like they're, mastering engineers are crazy because they do multiple things in series. And again, like I don't have that experience, and honestly, I don't have that ear. For me, this is all about like getting something in mixing, getting things to come out, be creative with it. And then when it comes to putting stuff on the master, it's about making it sound good, making it sound loud, and being safe, really. So sometimes I will mess with dry wet, and then probably put another compressor after that, barely kiss it again, but that's all just taste stuff. And parallel compression is like, it sounds really good. It's just nice, subtle, like a way of introducing it more subtly. Cool.
Cool, thanks. Is there just something to worry about when it comes to delay? So for example, when I add another compressor, but I have also the dry signal, is there some sort of something to worry about phasing, about delaying the signal?
There could be, but there shouldn't be. Like in hardware, there shouldn't be in hardware. There could be. The thing about hardware, when you're coming back into the DAW, like that's more about latency than the actual hardware, like that's just something you're going to have to figure, that everybody has to figure out of their own studio. And like this limiter is pretty cool. It'll add latency if you add the look ahead more. So doing that on a track in like with 2 tracks, with one, you're going to add phasing by doing that. You're not actually going to add phasing with Ableton because it's just going to delay the whole sound. Probably. I haven't really done that, to be honest, but yeah, there's things to look out for there. Like that's going to be a listening thing, 100%, and just being like, do you hear any phasing? Yeah, there's visual tools that can help you with that, but yeah, I'm not very versed in that either. But I'd say, that can happen for sure. Anytime you run 2 sounds at the same time, that can be an issue. So you just have to listen out for it.
Cool.
All right. So I'm gonna move my camera real quick. If anybody has any questions, feel free to talk to me while I get this going. And then this will be really quick. It's literally the same patch that we've been listening to here on the modular. And I'll show you where I put muscle, how I use it. I do have the Cosmotronics compressor in here too. It's not hooked up. I think for time, I'll probably just put that one on the master, and we can show that one's a little bit more deep than muscle is. Muscle's super simple. And that's why I wanted to show in Ableton first, so we could have all this visual guide here. So real quick with muscle, I'll go over there in a second, but I want to just, while we're still looking at this compressor, muscle has, I'm going to look at it real quick so I remind myself. All right, so muscle has one knob called comp. It's a compression knob. Then it has attack, release, and then it has gain. That's it. So gain is this gain right here. It's output gain. And then comp is literally threshold, input gain, just like this, and ratio. So as you turn up the comp knob, you're turning up the input gain, you're turning down the threshold, you're bringing the threshold at which the compression will start down, and you're also increasing the ratio. There's a threshold switch, which allows you to like bring the threshold down. Like it's a range switch, like it allows you to bring it further down than the knob would allow. That is for compressing things outside of modular that might not be as loud. So like if you have something that's like a Roland, what is it, the SP404, right? Those are pretty quiet. Like you have one of those, you can bring the threshold down. That helps you get more input gain, the whole thing. We're going to keep the switch all the way to left. That's where it works best for modular. And yeah, I'm going to do this and I will be right back. And sorry, my camera's going to kind of go crazy for a second.
I'm also going to drop that link to the video that you just did. I think it was like what, a week or two ago that you were referring to about the muscle.
Yeah, it was 2 weeks.
Yeah, so I dropped that in the chat too. I also dropped just for everyone to, if you're not, in case you weren't paying attention to the chat, I dropped in there some of Alex's links to the music, and also there are some links in there to some compressors that we were talking about. And feel free to drop links there as well. I'll collect all the links and drop those in the Discord too.
I'm just gonna move my mic over real quick.
As we're in interim, I have a question in case people are here are hybrid and kind of feed their sound through Ableton for their live performances or something instead of just production.
Totally.
I had a question. Are you guys doing it like some of the top guys who use a sound card and an external sound card instead of just your computer to actually boost your sound? Or you're just going straight through Ableton?
Chris. Oh, sorry, Alex. I wasn't sure if you were.
Oh no, all good. I'm trying to understand the question, like an external sound card, like an interface, or like the UAD, like
yeah, like an interface
thing.
Yeah, like all the the big DJs. You're looking at Houghton, McCall, Budaber, and Paco Asana, all these techno guys. When they're on the Model 1 and Tractor or whatever, they need an external sound card to actually amplify their sound because they play after a big DJ. They want to get a level higher. So these guys actually travel with it's not in their press kit. They travel with sound cards.
Right.
And
yeah.
so I'm wondering if Eurorack people are in that same mindset because they're going into hybrid and now their sound's processing to a computer.
I think that's just a matter of output levels. Like instead of using gear that's like -10, like a lot of DJ gear would be, wanting to have a sound card that had a +4 output just to go ahead and match pro levels and go bounce into a mixer. And you can do that with Eurorack with a balanced output module, or just your choice of sound cards that have a +4 output to just -10. Even the ES9 module has a balanced +4 output on it.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Yeah, so it's not so much a matter of like you're doing it because you're modular, you're doing it because you're hybrid. It's just what level does the mixer want you to hit it with and sending it that level.
Yeah, and you've got to get out of the computer in one way or another, and most people, like, their way for them to do that is with an audio interface, like one way or another that has 4 outs, or some people plug into CDJs, and the CDJs become the for DJing, those become the audio interface. So like you have to get in and out. For me, hybrid. I'm modular, but when I do that, I have the ES8, and it's just a little bit out of the camera, but I have the ES8, and if I were to do that, I would just use this, and then instead of going to the clubs mixer out of this, I would come back out of the Bitwig, out of the ES8. I'd go back into my performance mixer, so that way everything's in one spot, and then I have a master knob on the performance mixer. So the nice thing about that is like Chris is saying, like it can be super loud, but you can also turn it down if you're clipping your input, you just have the master knob to do that. And so it's nice to have, for me, just have that control right there instead of having it in Ableton or having to do it in Ableton. Like I can get all that sounding good, come back into the rig, and then go out.
The other thing I just tweaked on, if people were just using the headphone output from their computer or their laptop, that is going to be a lower level than hitting it with like a +4 balance. So anyone who's doing like stuff on the laptop, I would definitely upgrade from the headphone out to an audio interface to get better signal to noise, but also a hotter level.
I think too, what you're referring to, Christian, is that, so one thing they do, like for example, Richie Houghton, you brought him up, he takes his interface, right? So when he comes back out of the interface, he'll opt to either send it directly through a mixer to, he'll patch it through a mixer like Alex was saying, and then he'll take that output of his mixer and put it on one of the channels. So like I have the model 1.4. So what I'll do is I'll route my modular into one of the channels, and then you can come back out of your ES8 or ES9 and then put that into the other channels on the mixer. So that way he's still getting that sound, but he's then using the physical mixer to be able to sculpt live and then use that as his DJ mixer to bring in and out the
Right.
channels.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's where that mixer is being inserted into the signal chain.
Yeah, because I know they're using compressors at the top there, and they're not having to worry about the sound of like a template of each track and having to change compression and stuff. It's just there, right?
Right. Yeah. So
I'm not big into that hybrid stuff for that, but so thanks you guys for answering that.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like Chris said, I think like if you're using the headphone output, you're definitely going to want to just go out of a sound card just to have that elevated sound. Plus, like you get headphone output of that. Most sound cards have separate like routing for your headphones, so you can have a Q mix in your headphones out of the computer. That's a really big thing why sound cards would be helpful if that's like the only sound source. But yeah, like Trovarsi saying, you have multiple sound sources. Yeah, you just like run out into the mixer, mix it after the fact. Okay, so here's the muscle. I'm sorry if you can't see it very well, but it's this one right here. So it's right next to the overseer, and this overseer is not on my master or anything, so we can just ignore it. It's on, it's actually on the black box. So the muscle, I always have it set for, it's on the master. I have attack super fast, just like I would have had in the Ableton one. I've released about 50%. I don't know what these values really are. And then, so I can't tell you like what milliseconds that is, but nice thing about muscle is we've got, a bypass switch, so you can listen to it in and out, and then the comp knobs at the top. So we also have the limit switch on the top, and I'll explain that. So we'll play the patch here. All right. So right now, let's go to. There we go. We can hear that all right? Cool. So you can see here, I don't know if you can see the LED, but there's an LED at the top, and it turns red when you're gain reducing, and turns green when you're adding gain. So right here, comps all the way off, we're not getting any gain reduction. As I turn it up, we just get more and more. And then when we get up here, we get that pumping zone, right? And so here you can really hear, especially if I turn release down, you can really hear it reacting, going back and forth. We turn it off. That's the mix without it. This is the mix with it. Extreme example, yet again, just to show where that would be. But this limit switch on this one is kind of cool, because right now we're adding gain in between. As we turn the switch to the right, we're limiting the amount of gain that the compressor can actually add, which we're then turning it into less of a pump and more of just a like top compressor. So yeah, listen to it from, I have the compression knob all the way up. Listen to it over here. Sounds like unnatural and like pumpy. We turn it all the way to the right. And now we've just got more of this kind of limited sound. I'm gonna back it off a little bit. I'll turn the gain up a little bit. Just, that's the output gain. Doesn't really have anything to do with compression. It's just like makeup gain. So for me, this is where I kind of leave my muscle at. So we could do something a little bit more dynamic here. And one of the things about this is that we're not pushing when the kick drum goes away and all the gain reduction goes away. The kick drum's my loudest thing in this mix, right? We're not getting so much gain being added. So if I push over here to this other side of that switch, we're adding so much gain because that kick drum's not there anymore. And that can sound a little unnatural, and that can be frustrating when you're like, you go to a dynamic part, you go to a part that is supposed to be quiet, and then suddenly you just get this like wash of volume because the compressor is working too hard there. So I just like to leave it here, leave it subtle. And then, you know, I bring the kick drum back in.
Is that in the middle setting of the muscle? Sorry, I didn't.
All the way on the right.
All the way.
Yeah, limit switch all the way to the right, and then the threshold all the way to the left. And so I'll show you what the threshold does when we flip the switch. You can hear it just really go to town. That's all the way on the right. So now it's just compressing like crazy because it's expecting a lower level signal. So again, if you wanted an effect of like uber compression, you could put the threshold switch to the right, put the gain switch to the left, and you can get some pretty good like over compression effects. But like I was saying, and I was talking, you know, just saying earlier, like for me, it's a balance of like how much room I have in the case versus what I really need to have compressed. And for me, I've shrunk down from 3 compressors because I wanted to compress multiple things down to just 1. And if I did have, like, if I had a way to submix, I probably would put a compressor just on the drums or something, or like drums and then everything else gets a compressor. One of the things I didn't talk about, quick little tip that I just remembered too, is like your kick drum and your sub, your bass, that's a good place to put a limiter or a compressor as well, is just like group those two together. So you could submix just the kick drum and just the bass and put a limiter on that. That kind of helps glue things together. If your kick drum's the loudest thing, it can act a little bit like a sidechain compressor at that point because it's going to be turning down when the kick drum comes through and turning up when the kick drum's not there and the bass is there. So it kind of just helps glue that stuff together a little bit more. So yeah, then we move up to the Cosmotronic compressor. Oh, sorry, the camera got all messed up, didn't it? My bad, guys. Try and get this light here a little bit better for you. Oh, just turn it off. Cool. So this compressor is just a little bit more involved. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bypass muscle, and then we will just route through this. This is a nice one because it's stereo as well, muscle stereo. Did I plug this in? I didn't. Funny. Okay. Cool. So this one's a little bit more involved, and it just gives you some more options, right? And this one might be better to use in a sound design case or in a bigger case like we're talking about, so you can get some of those other compression effects going. Okay, so with this one, the threshold knob, you turn down this way, and you've got the red amount is your gain reduction, and you've got makeup gain here. We're in bypass mode, so I'll turn that back down, turn it on, boom, super compression. Let me look at it real quick. So the main difference with this one is that it has a tone control, which is kind of cool, and then it has ratio. So like with the muscle, you're turning up, again, threshold, ratio, and gain all with this knob. And here you've got the ratio is a little bit more, you know, you have control, so you can make a softer compressor if you want. And then this warm switch, I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but it's super subtle. That just imparts the tone of its circuit on the sound. So go to the pure, go to the warm, and now we'll bypass, and then we'll bring it back in. Got the gain up a little bit, but you know. So yeah, that's just an example of another compressor doing the exact same thing, obviously. But you know, with this setup, again, I've got attack fast, I've got release in the middle. It's pretty much the exact same thing I'm doing with a muscle. But this one's super cool because you've got that tone control, and then you've got the ratio, so you're in control of the compression amount when it comes to the ratio. So just a little bit more involved. And then this one also has a sidechain filter, which allows you to basically, what it does is it filters the content going into the detector. So if your kick drum's the loudest thing, but you don't necessarily want the kick drum to be what everything's ducking to, you can filter out the lows and do a high pass filter. And you can watch, sorry, just knocked it. Watching that red, we'll just do maybe these two. Right, there we go. So we're getting here, you can see that red coming out because of the kick drum. I've got it set to high pass. As I turn that up, we're not getting any gain reduction anymore because nothing's breaching the threshold, because we're filtering out the kick drum. And so therefore we're now listening to other things. So I bring this stuff up, we're compressing only to like the hi-hat signals and things like that. So that's another thing on taste. Like you can get you might start pumping really fast if your kick drum's really loud and you want a nice subtle compression and you don't want to just clamping on the kick all the time. You can filter out what's going to the detector. And it's also a good thing, why they call it sidechain filters. It's a good thing for if you are sidechaining to something like that's not a kick, or say you're sidechaining to like a drum bus, and you only want and you can't separate the kick, right? So like say you're sidechaining to like an MPC that's playing the drums and you can't get the kick out separately, you can run just a full signal of those drums into the sidechain filter, or in the sidechain, and then when you could low pass filter down to the point where now you're only going to be detecting the bass, which if your kick's the loudest, you're probably going to be pretty safe that you're sidechaining to that kick. And I always talk about sidechain with kick because it's like the most common in dance music. You know, you can sidechain like we talked about to your sends, but you can also like sidechain to vocals. So like if you have a vocal part coming in or something like that needs room, you run a mult, run the vocal into the sidechain, and you can turn other stuff down when the vocal's playing, and just get a little bit more interesting like pumping to your sound, because your sounds are going to be reacting to the vocals when it's there. So all right, that's that on
Very cool.
on compression and compression Eurorack.
Nice. Yeah, that was the module I was saying about earlier, where I would send a pad through it and just sidechain with like a pattern gate or something to kind of make the pad kind of bounce around a little bit, or have its own, create, it's like a nice way to create another variation in a song. Like if you want to have like a A, B and you're playing live, it's like then like maybe add like that pattern to kind of gate the pad to kind of switch it up, and then kill the side chain to go back.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Actually-
like, you can do a lot of that stuff with VCAs. And you could offset it to stay on, and then, hit it with negative envelope to drop it down, and get that rhythmic stuff. But like the thing why compressors are rad is like, and why you want to use that compressor for that is because it has a built-in envelope. Now you don't need another envelope for that. It's made for that. It's like, it works. You don't need like, sometimes like if you want to do it with a VCA and that VCA doesn't have an attenuverter on it, now you've got to figure out how to get a negative envelope to go into it, So
Yo, Ed, you have
yeah,
a
we got some
question?
questions.
Thanks, Alex. This is super helpful. And the way that you explain things, I have maybe a stronger model in my head of what's going on. I've been using the muscle forever, and I started using it just to hear things. I wanted to hear more things in the mix, and it served that purpose. But I'm suspecting, I kind of facepalmed here. I suspect that at a cost of dynamics, my set and forget approach. Just yesterday, I was trying to sequence volume in a voice, and I was kind of fighting with it. And now I'm thinking, oh, if I could look over my shoulder yesterday, I probably see I was fighting with compression. I was trying to add dynamics to a voice. I sequence mixes, and I get that's very satisfying, and I get the volumes that I want. But I was trying to sequence per note dynamics, and I'm like, now I'm going to go play after we have this call and see if I was actually fighting with compression.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
the
Like, if it
muscle, I
was
love the
there.
muscle. I love that I can hear everything, but I suspect that I did it at a cost of dynamics.
Totally. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. So I multi-tracked that patch into Ableton, and then I made what we were listening to in the Ableton version, and I have that breakdown, and that breakdown is like, I'm really like happy with it. I like the way it sounds, but I'm like not happy with the dynamic range there, because there's not much, it's like it should be. The kick drum goes away, the bass goes away, everything goes away, and it's like 3 instruments out of that part, and it's still pretty loud. And so I actually just opened this session, and I have a compressor that's pretty deep on my synths, and that are still on during that part, and I have compressors on so many tracks that my dynamic range for those instruments isn't what I want it to be. So now I need to go in and mess with that and see where that is, because I'm in the same boat. And it's like, oh yeah, maybe I should automate the volume to go down there. It's like, well, maybe if you just didn't compress it so hard, it would sound the way you want it to sound, because they're not loud samples. I just compressed them.
I think with this insight, there's all kinds of things I can do, but like I didn't know that I didn't know until I had your explanation in my head here. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear it. Yeah, thank you for saying it. I appreciate it. Anybody else got questions, thoughts?
Pretty much just thanking you guys. I got the muscle at the end of my chain. This clarified your settings sort of match mine. They fluctuate kind of on genre a little bit.
100%.
I'm going from techno, and then I do like a break beat switch over, and then go back to techno or something. I flipped that a bit. And then thanks to Trovarsi, because I ended up getting that little mob bop effects unit, kind of like the Octatrack thing. And that would be my A/B switch from the performance mixer, the W&B performance mixer. I do a send into the mob bop for my sidechain to get a real good sidechain from for some good hard techno, industrial techno, and then reverb chains on there as well, and control the compression from there. But at the end of the day, I have the muscle at the end of the chain, keeping everything together.
Yeah, and it's just like just can be nice and on the end. And like I was telling my friend last night about, like, I wanted to be clear about, there are some instruments and sometimes you might not want a compressor. And I brought up pads, and I brought up ambient music a lot, and then he was like, yeah, except for you should have one on the end just to like help, like you said, just keep things together, you know? And I'm like, yeah, it's just really easy to overdo it. And I overdo it a lot, especially because you saw my technique is to like overdo it and back it off. So sometimes I tend to leave it a little bit high, come back the next day, turn it back down a little bit more. It's like, it's just learning, figuring it out, and listening. It's all about that. It's all about listening. And it sounds like you're on the right track with that, with like being able to like understand that if your breakbeat thing could benefit from a little bit of a different setting, whether that's release or compression amount, all of that. It's like, sounds like you're on the right track for sure.
Again, y'all.
Nice. I guess if there's not any additional questions, I'm just going to stop the recording at this point.
Nope.
All right, cool. Yeah, thanks for doing this. Hang on.
Yeah, I hope it's not, there's it's fun doing these talks. I appreciate everybody chiming in. I really appreciate the extra examples and also the questions. Like, it's easy to talk a lot. It's easy to cover too many things. I think we did a pretty good job of just saying like it's compression. I didn't really want to like dive super deep into sidechain, just give a real quick example. But yeah, I hope it's not, too much information, but it's we've also got the recording that we'll get out. So
yeah, this was great.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the insight and just like communal vibe. Everybody, thanks for hanging out with me for my first talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, cool.
Very cool.